Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode. Super excited to get to talk to you about the Super Bowl and the recap of the championship weekend that decided the Super Bowl matchup. I'm your host of this podcast, Evan Rankin, and I'm joined by.
Caleb Colson.
Today, we're going to recap the championship weekend as well as talk about some breaking news regarding Tom Brady. And then we'll give you a little bit of a taste to the preview of the Super Bowl. We won't get too far into the weeds as we are going to do that next week. We'll go really in depth and give you a good Super Bowl prep as well as our picks and potentially a bet from me as well. So first we'll roll right into the recap of this weekend. It was quite a championship weekend, huh, Caleb?
Yeah, I mean, even though one of the games was pretty lopsided, I think a few things of interest happened during it, with the Eagles and Niners, but that Cincinnati versus Kansas City game was a real thriller down to the end.
100%. Yeah, both games have points that we need to address and lots of talking points that are going to be brought up. Yes, one was a lot closer than the other. So kind of for the sake of interest, we're going to dive into the a little more lopsided game first, and it happened to be the chronological order as well. Saturday afternoon, the Eagles were able to dominate the 49ers. This domination occurred partially, of course, due to injuries occurring to Brock Purdy.
And Josh Johnson.
Yes, and also eventually Josh Johnson, who came in to replace Brock Purdy. So obviously not the way the Niners wanted this game to go. There was times where this game was closer than we thought. It may be due to the fact that there was injury, but not the way the Niners wanted it to go.
Yeah, not at all. And I think it's definitely something to say for the Niners organization and how it's run that they made it to the championship round on their fourth stringer, and then finally it all fell apart once they lost their fourth stringer, and then even lost their fifth stringer, Josh Johnson, and then emergency QB CMC came in, albeit for maybe a few plays, but then they brought Brock Purdy, but he never really threw the ball again. And it's just a real heartbreaker, to be honest, because I wonder just if everyone's just like, well, yeah, Brock Purdy, this is the new norm, and then now he got hurt, and like, oh, here we go again. And the Niners defense really put up a good fight, at least in the first half, but once the turnover by Josh Johnson happened where he fumbled that snap, and just the dominant run offense of the Eagles really just took over. And there's not much you can do when your offense keeps giving the ball away and punting away, so yeah. I think it was more lopsided. The score made it look more lopsided than it really was, at least based on the first half.
For certain points, at least, definitely like you say, at points during the first half, the Niners defense was able to keep them close. Mm-hmm. And before I talk more about the Niners defense's ability to kind of hang around and give the Eagles the praise that they do deserve, obviously being able to reach the Super Bowl, regardless of what happened injury-wise in this game, they still were able to get the job done and get the job done in an impressive fashion. Mm-hmm. But we also must address the fact that Brock Purdy, it looks like he's going to have to get Tommy John surgery. So this injury was very serious. There were kind of thoughts of, well, why did he come back in at the end of the game if he was good enough to come back in the end of the game? Was Josh Johnson really better? And it's true, he was the better option for him before Josh Johnson ultimately got hurt. But Brock Purdy's going to have to get Tommy John surgery, so that's going to be a long road for recovery back, and it looks like it's almost going to make the Niners' quarterback decision for them. They're going to have to stick with Trey Lance, hope he rehabs, get him to be the starter, and keep Jimmy G around to back him up while Brock Purdy rehabs before they have to make any further decisions, about these three quarterbacks.
Yeah, and it's really hard because I think Trey Lance, they put so much draft capital into him to get him, so they want to start him, but they're also paying Jimmy G a lot, so it's going to be a tough decision for them. And originally I thought it was going to be a two-way battle between Brock Purdy and Trey Lance and maybe try to ship Jimmy off, but I don't think that's going to be able to happen because of how untradeable his contract is, like you were saying before we started. But I think you're right. I think it kind of starts their quarterback decision for them.
Absolutely, because my thoughts were kind of that they were going to have to make a decision between Brock Purdy and Trey Lance, and although that's a terribly tough decision to make between two young budding stars, potentially budding stars, I'm still not all the way bought in on Trey Lance, but it looks
Right.
like he's going to get another great opportunity to show that he could be a quarterback to step up and excel in this Kyle Shanahan system, and potentially even exceed in this exceed expectations in this system. And Brock Purdy's going to have to take a road to rehab, and it's going to be hard, bringing him back. Depending on the results of next season, and I think they're going to have to keep Jimmy G around, partially due to his contract, like Caleb mentioned, but also just because he's kind of a good backup role, and you kind of want to decide which one of these young starters you're going to go with, and then keep Jimmy as the backup potentially. For this next season at least, put that decision on hold.
Yeah, and another thing to think about is if the Niners can have the same amount of success with a solid, starter where it's not going to their fourth string quarterback again, like if Trey Lance can play the entire season and lead him to the conference championship, that might be the end of Brock Purdy's chance to maybe, start at least with the Niners, because he might have shown enough this season where if he wants to, he's like, hey, I'm going to go somewhere else if you guys are going to stay with Trey, because I mean, it's almost like we were saying with Brock Purdy, he created controversy even though he's their third string quarterback because of how well he's doing. If one of these two quarterbacks, Jimmy G or Trey Lance, does well next season, then they have real no reason to go back to someone else, and that might be this might be Brock Purdy's the end to his like a little Cinderella story.
Yeah, it sadly could be, but like you also say, he could have potentially put enough on film to be able to get an opportunity somewhere else, and be able to get the chance to become maybe that franchise guy for some other franchise. If it does end up being Trey Lance that becomes the franchise guy, or even Jimmy G steps up, due to whatever things happening, next year, you just don't know. But I think before we move on to the AFC matchup that was a little bit tighter, I think we need to give the Eagles some praise. And like you had mentioned a little bit prior, this running game by this Eagles offense is super impressive. They're able to pass the ball, and they can pass the ball to get a lead, and they can pass the ball early on in the game because a lot of defenses are going to be trying to prime up for that run threat, that run offense. You got a multi-headed monster here when you're looking at Jalen Hurts, obviously can tote the rock, and you got Miles Sanders, and then you got Kenneth Gainwell as well, and even Boston Scott.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So you got a lot of different guys that could be toting the rock here. A lot of guys that could be fully energized when they're running the ball down and just keep pounding. So it's really impressive by the Eagles to be able to put this game on ice and wear down one of the better defenses throughout the NFL this year, statistically the best defense in the NFC.
Yeah, and I mean, they scored 31 points while Jalen Hurts only threw for less than 200 yards. So that really says something about how well they're able to control the ball and put the ball in the end zone with just even their running game. I think it also speaks to say how good of a coach Nick Sirianni is. I think he might even outcoached Kyle Shanahan, at least especially with that first drive in the 4th and 3 when Devonta Smith looked like he didn't actually catch the ball, and then Kyle Shanahan didn't challenge, and then later on in the game, Nick Sirianni challenged the Brock Purdy throw where he got hurt and it ended up being the right call. So
Yes, yeah.
I don't think it was like a blowout of coaching because, of course, when you're starting or when your fourth string quarterback goes out, it makes it really hard to coach it regardless.
Coaching can only mean so much in that situation.
But Nick Sirianni's done a great job with this team in the past few years, and now taking them back to the Super Bowl. Just a great job overall, and definitely Coach of the Year candidate for sure.
Yeah, totally. It's almost can't be overstated the job that the Eagles did here. Regardless of the arguments that you want to make about competition, the Niners were still a very, very good football team, despite the obvious unfortunate injury that occurred in this game. But the Eagles are the ones advancing to the Super Bowl out of the NFC this year. And now we're going to dive into what happened in the AFC matchup. Me and Caleb were right here. It was a little contrary to, I think, a lot of the public belief on what might happen here due to the history between Joe Burrow and Patrick Mahomes. But maybe despite some controversial reffing, there's always controversial reffing. The Chiefs were able to knock off the Bengals at home and head back to their third Super Bowl in the last 4 years.
Yeah, and I know I mentioned they're both really thrilling games. I thought this one kind of was a little bit of a snooze fest, at least towards the middle of the game, and then it really started getting interesting back towards the end. But yeah, everyone can talk about the calls made during the game, the missed calls, the call on Osai at the end of the game that gave Harrison Butker a really chip shot preferred over a 55-yarder. But Harrison Butker's a great kicker. He could have still made the 55-yarder, and then no one would have been complaining about any calls.
And also, they even might have had time to do another out route play to pick up 5 to 10 more yards and make it an easier field goal.
Exactly. So I think the calls for terrible officiating are warranted. I think people are trying to give it more deciding factor.
More weight.
Yeah, more weight than it actually was. And both defenses really played well against two really high-powered offenses. And I think just Mahomes and the Chiefs' clutchness at the end got them into field goal range, plus that call, and they took the dub.
Well, these teams just match up unbelievably well. We've seen it happen time and time again over the last couple seasons here. It tends to always kind of be a matchup where these two teams are both in the 20s range for score. Usually a field goal or so wins it. And this game, towards the end, looked like it was almost destined for overtime, the way it was kind of back and forth. Yeah. Scoring kind of picked up towards the end of the third quarter, into the fourth quarter. Looked like maybe it might have went into overtime at a 23-23, 27-27. Stops and turnovers occurred later on in the fourth quarter, keeping this at a 20-20 game where we thought that might take us into overtime. And then obviously, it's a total bonehead penalty. I'm sorry, yes, there's arguments for Bengals fans maybe on calls that happened earlier in the game, but by the letter of the law, this was a penalty, and if Joe Burrow was in this situation, running out of bounds, getting hit in that exact situation, all Bengals fans want that call. Yeah. So I think it was needed to be called. Some refs might hold their pocket on that one, but as Caleb already mentioned, Butker was going to have an opportunity for a game-winning kick regardless of the flag. Doesn't mean he would have made the longer kick. Right. It's still it's tough. It's a tough situation, but this should be if anything a learning moment. You can't touch the quarterback in that situation. You just can't do that. It's absolutely kind of boneheaded in my opinion, but it cost him the game, and ultimately this game early on you mentioned that it kind of had a lull to it. It was interesting because these teams match up so well. The Chiefs started out so well. They were able to move the ball, but they were stalling. And then even when they picked off Joe Burrow, they weren't really able to take advantage of that. There was, a point where this felt like the Chiefs were just handling the game. They had it in their hand, and still boom, 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 here comes the Bengals. All of a sudden, it's 13-13, tie game. And then we had the thriller the rest of the way.
Yeah, and even if you don't want to blame the calls, Joe Burrow threw the pick that gave them that last drive. As soon as I saw Joe Burrow had the ball with not much time left to try to break that tie, I was like, ooh, this might be it for the Bengals for the Chiefs, because the Bengals started to move the ball. But then he threw the pick and gave it back to the Chiefs and let the Chiefs control their destiny, not the Bengals. And so you can even go back to that. I mean, Joe Burrow didn't look amazing. I mean, he threw 2 picks, right?
Yeah, well, that last pick wasn't totally his fault, as it was just an excellent tip. Well, he threw the ball into double coverage, so you're kind of asking to get picked. He had prayers answered earlier on in the game with that touchdown pass to T. Higgins that was just absolutely remarkable, as well as a great pass to Jamar Chase down towards the goal line that was able to help them punch in one of their touchdowns. But this ball wasn't the best thrown, but the Chiefs ended up stalling out on that drive after they got the pick. It was actually the Bengals punted back to the Chiefs with 39 seconds left, and it was a large kick return by the Chiefs punt returner. His name's slipping my mind right now, but he was able to get the ball out to close to the 50-yard line, and that's what really enabled the Chiefs to control their destiny. But you are right, the turnovers by Burrow kind of bit them in the butt. So if you're a Bengals fan, you definitely got to be looking at those 2 Joe Burrow turnovers, those 2 picks.
Yeah, and I think something that's kind of interesting is the downplay of how Patrick Mahomes did, because I know he only had 2 touchdowns, but he had over 300 yards, and kind of goes to how great he is that we're like, oh, 300 yards, 2 touchdowns, I guess, whatever. But for other quarterbacks, that's going to be a pretty good day. So Patrick Mahomes definitely took care of business and helped the Chiefs out a lot, and I think the better team made it to the Super Bowl this time.
I think that the Chiefs were able to move the ball at will, and they showed that until it got down closer to toward the goal line or onto the opponent's side of the 50. The Bengals were able to kind of tighten up, and the Bengals defense was really good this year, and throughout the playoffs they were really good.
Yep.
So in the end, the better team kind of came out on top here. It was a very evenly matched game. I'm excited to see how both the Chiefs and then the Eagles match up in this Super Bowl. And before we give you a little bit of a taste of our thoughts on potentially, some early leans and some early maybe keys to what we think will happen in next week's big game, the Super Bowl 57, which does include a matchup of brothers, the Travis Kelce on the Chiefs and Jason Kelce. Yep, the Kelce Bowl, the Super Bowl. Before we get to talk to you about that exciting news, we got to talk to you about some other very, very big news that the other day Tom Brady in the morning posted on his social media a video addressing all of his fans in the NFL, announcing his retirement from the NFL.
Yeah, and I think even though it's the second time, I think this one felt more
real. Almost.
More real, yeah. And I know a lot of people are kind of dogging on him, being like, you divorced and you went 8-9, and now you're deciding to cut off here. But that might be why he's deciding to cut off. He's like, well, I've started to lose some of my relationships, some of my connections outside of what is ultimately his job, and maybe he's this season kind of showed him like maybe there's other stuff to do, or he may be losing his love for the game or something. I don't know, but this one definitely feels more real, and just what a career by him. You could even argue that he has 3 separate, 3 different eras in his
dynasties,
career. Yeah, where he could go into the Hall of Fame in 3 different parts of his career, which is absolutely insane. And as much as he tortured the Steelers, gotta respect him for just how amazing he's been for these past 20 years.
I definitely think you hit the nail, right on the head with the fact that it does feel more real because, you almost know for certain that there's no coming back this time. Last time there's always that chance, Brett Favre had announced his retirement and cried to the fans of Green Bay before returning to the Vikings or the Jets and then ultimately going to the Vikings, playing a couple more seasons. And Tom Brady then last year obviously did the same thing, retiring and coming back. But this time, I think what also might have played into it is the fact that he didn't want to just fade into obscurity. And I know that wasn't going to happen with Tom Brady. Nobody would let that happen. The media wouldn't let that happen because he single-handedly has rewritten the history books and kind of created the idea of what is possible for a human being at the quarterback position. There's never been a history of quarterbacks that are really able to go. I mean, there's a handful that you can pick out, some greats, some of the all-time greats that were able to go into their 40s and potentially still have some success. But the man is 45 years old, and 8-9, he still showed signs of being Tom Brady, and he obviously has the skill, the talent. He's worked years and years on his craft, and that's what made him so good at his craft, what made him the best at this position that we have known, in this modern era. He's rewritten like almost every stat that you can think of, whether you want to measure it statistically or you want to measure it by championships. He's at the top of all these categories, and he had the longevity. But no matter how much longevity you have, eventually Father Time is going to catch up to you. It even looked like Father Time might be catching up to Aaron Rodgers this year. We'll ultimately see on what decisions he makes, whether he hangs it up or whether he tries to go one more year now that Tom Brady is out of the league. Yeah. But you're talking about a difference of about 7 years here, but you're also visually seeing similar regression in arm strength and, decision making and accuracy and other things.
Yeah, and I think the Aaron Rodgers take kind of it definitely is going to be interesting. Maybe he's more motivated to go to a different team and try to lead them to the Super Bowl now that there's not the roadblock that Brady is. But um, I think I don't think he retired too early, and I think this is perfect timing because there's no saying that next year he'd do worse or better. But I think now, instead of kind of trying to drag it out, it's definitely a good stopping point. And he starts his broadcasting year as early as broadcasting career as early as next year. I believe I saw a report where he had already signed a contract.
And it's with Fox,
Yep.
correct?
Mm-hmm.
So he'll probably be. We'll see if they keep Kevin Burkhardt as the number one play-by-play announcer. His color commentary partner right now is Greg Olson. So more than likely, whether it's next year or if Tom Brady decides to take a season or two off away, he'll be coming into the Fox booth at some point, doing that color commentary spot for the Fox games of the week.
Yeah, and I think hopefully it turns out how Tony Romo was at least in 2020 when he was calling plays before they happen. That'd be and hopefully he can keep that because that'd be really interesting. And I don't know, Tony Romo to me is kind of like falling off a cliff a little bit in terms of quality.
Well, the interest that comes from having a good color commentary guy is providing insight that a normal person doesn't get to have, and that's what really made Tony Romo so special when he first came out of the NFL and into the booth. Not everybody really expected that, and not everybody loved him. Obviously, he was beloved among Cowboys fans, but many people that are Cowboys haters probably were not fans of Tony Romo as well. But a lot of people he won over through his genuine skills of providing good insight and good takes, and he's kind of snowballed into a little bit of a, his ego's built up, and he'll kind of just say whatever after he signed this contract, and he maybe there's some questions about his preparation for some games, which I think part of it maybe just needs to be go back to that providing genuinely good insight, into things that people, would not just genuinely think when watching a game that don't actually get to experience, years in the NFL. And I think Tom Brady has an opportunity to be a great color commentator. At the same time, he has an opportunity to get fed, into maybe getting a bigger head like Tony Romo has. And Jim Nantz is, wonderful history of play-by-play throughout multiple sports, legend in golf as well as football. Jim Nantz just kind of feeds the fire with Romo, and it doesn't really help. So hopefully Tom Brady gets a good play-by-play guy that kind of has a nice dichotomy there.
Yeah, it can complement him.
Absolutely. Well, I think before we wrap this up and before we go too long rambling on about Tom Brady, although he is due his respect for what he's done to the NFL and everything, but we do want to give you a little bit of insight into the Super Bowl to maybe give you a taste, and hope that you come back and join us this week when we dive super into the weeds. But I'd like to ask you, Caleb, what are you thinking so far in this matchup between the Chiefs and the Eagles? What do you think maybe will be keys here?
I think it'll be a really good Super Bowl, and hopefully it's close. And I think it's really interesting to see how these offenses are going to play, because the Chiefs' offense, I think, is just the complete opposite of the Eagles' offense. The Eagles' offense likes to run the ball, absolutely pound it down their opponent's throat, take care of the ball, and take control of the clock. The Chiefs, they've changed a little bit from last year from as many huge downfield splash plays, but they're still a really dynamic offense that will pass the ball on you and just do it their way and have success, but they're not as run heavy. So I think it's just definitely going to be interesting to see how these defenses can react to how their offenses do, based on, because who knows, the Chiefs may be able to score, but if they score too quickly, is their defense going to be able to survive the onslaught that is the Eagles' offense?
Yeah, and the way the Eagles impressively control pace. And I think this game is going to be really important to who jumps out first, whose style are we playing. The Eagles are known to pass the ball to get a lead, but if they are able to get that lead, then it's going to be, if they have a lead and the Chiefs can't stop the run, for Kansas City. But on the other hand of things, if the Chiefs are able to stop the run while simultaneously, making Jalen Hurts throw the ball and stay in the pocket instead of, because even what makes the passing game of the Eagles even more threatening is the fact that Jalen Hurts can be throwing the ball, but he also can be running the ball at any point in time. So if they can control Jalen Hurts, keep him in the pocket, maybe even get a couple hits on him early in the game, that could be huge for the Chiefs. I'll be really interested to see how this game plays out pacing-wise. In my own opinions, I kind of have, it's tough for me because it is a Super Bowl, and Super Bowls do tend to go lower scoring. A lot of them do. The last time the Eagles were in a Super Bowl, it was an extremely high-scoring game. Obviously, much different teams. That was five-ish years ago, 6-ish years ago.
2017.
2017, I believe. Yeah. So it's a different team, but I do kind of think that this one, the last two weren't super high scoring, but I think this one might actually be a pretty high scoring Super Bowl.
Yeah, and I think something you brought up that I want to touch on is so Jalen Hurts, his mobility in the passing game and the run game is huge, and it'll definitely be interesting to see if the Chiefs can stop him. But Mahomes, while he's mobile, he doesn't run as often, and I would say maybe as threatening as Jalen Hurts does, and that's not because he's not athletic enough. That's just the offensive end. He runs around to make plays happen in the passing game. Jalen Hurts runs around to get yards in the running game or get a nice pass off. But Mahomes' scrambling style is way different than Jalen Hurts, and Hassan Reddick and the Eagles defense is definitely going to have their work cut out for them to make sure to keep him hemmed up to not let him get those crazy magical plays where he's running around 50 yards and then getting the ball off.
You make great points here because both these quarterbacks are extremely dynamic quarterbacks. They are extremely dynamic, but they're dynamic in their own ways. And Mahomes early on in his career would scramble for 7 yards, and he still will go grab that first down if it's open, especially on third down. But Mahomes is almost always looking for a pass.
Yeah.
He's always he'll throw it away before he'll take 3 yards and a shot.
Yeah.
He's going to make that more mature as a passing quarterback decision.
Right.
But that's not Jalen Hurts' style. He will still make dynamic and elite passing plays, improvising plays, rolling out of the pocket, throwing on the run. But what he will do more often and more consistently, which the Chiefs defense will need to target and need to, try to neutralize, is his ability to scramble for 10. He doesn't have a guy on second and 9. All of a sudden it's 3rd and 1, and then he's QB sneaking it for the first down, and then the Eagles are just slowly putting together these drives where they're matriculating the ball down the field, they're controlling the clock, and they're wearing down your defense. So both these quarterbacks are going to have a huge impact on this game. Obviously, that's a very blatant statement when it comes to football. It's the most important position on the field, but this game is going to be totally come down to quarterback play and which dynamic tool of each quarterback shines and which lacks and which quarterback maybe makes mistakes or takes a bad sack or throws a bad pick or something.
Yeah, and I think something that's also important to not overlook is the Chiefs running backs. They're really dynamic in the passing game, especially Jerick McKinnon. I think they have over 500 more yards receiving by their running backs than the Eagles do for their running backs, which of course is just products of the system that they run. But this is not there are no running backs lap at Isaiah Pacheco and Jerick McKinnon. They're solid backs, and they will do well in the run game if they can scheme it up.
Exactly, and especially if the Chiefs get a lead. That's something I would look for is Pacheco just to have a bigger game if the Chiefs start playing with a lead. It's a great point that you mentioned how early on we talked about the running game of the Eagles, and this dynamic four-headed dragon can be even more sometimes. We're talking Hurts, Boston Scott, we're talking Kenneth Gainwell, and we're talking Miles Sanders. Their threats to the run game. Well, simultaneously, the Chiefs have a multitude of threats on the passing side of things.
Yeah.
You have Travis Kelce, then you have also Jerick McKinnon out of the backfield, like you mentioned, Pacheco out of the backfield, and you haven't even said a receiver's name yet.
Yeah.
Then you go into Kadarius Toney, then you go into Marquez Valdez-Scantling, who had an absolute massive game last weekend, and they can't cover everybody.
Right.
So what are you going to do? And I'm sure I'm forgetting a receiver too.
Juju.
Yeah, Juju Smith-Schuster and more too. So it's really ridiculous. They have so many threats, and they have an offensive genius at coach. So this game, I think it might be a little bit of a shootout. I'm super excited for it. We're gonna dive a lot more into it, into the weeds. Do you have any last thoughts, maybe for today about this game?
Nothing that we can't touch on next week.
Yeah, so I encourage you guys to look forward to our next week's episode where we will dive deep into the preview for the Super Bowl. We'll definitely give you our picks on who we think's gonna win.
Yep.
As a reminder, for the picks so far, we've had 12 games in this NFL playoffs. I am 11-1, and you are.
Did you pick the Eagles last week?
I did.
Fair enough.
I picked perfect this weekend once again.
Yeah, of course you did.
Yeah, and you went 1-1 last weekend, and something like.
I think I'm 9-3 or 8-4.
Yeah, it's 9-4 or 8-4. Yeah, 8-4. So, but that ever important 13th game is what we'll dive deep into next week. Give our picks and hopefully more. I hope you guys join us again on another episode of Now Let's Talk NFL Football. But today we're going to be signing out for now.
See ya.
Have a good one.